Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling one of the world's most, well, complex and often emotionally charged issues, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Absolutely. And finding reliable information, something beyond the usual noise and slogans, can feel pretty overwhelming.
Exactly, which is why we're focusing on a source today that really promises a different approach, a shortcut through that noise. Its mission isn't about persuasion.
No, not at all. It's explicitly designed to enable you, the reader, the listener, to form your own judgment. How? By sticking rigorously to cross-checked facts and, crucially, providing clear, unbiased definitions.
That sounds refreshing.
It is, and it covers a huge time frame, from antiquity right up to September 2025. The core principle seems to be there are no heroes without contradictions here, and no villains without reasons. It just lays out the evidence.
That emphasis on readable radar, on facts and definitions over efficacy, that's incredibly valuable, I think. It's about being informed, not just, picking a side based on headlines.
Precisely. An informed view needs that chronology. It needs to understand the terms, the legal definitions, not just the catchphrases.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting way back with those really deep historical layers. The source points out you can't grasp the present without seeing the land itself as layered, right?
Yep.
Canaan, Judea, Syria, Palestine.
That's right. The names changed, the rulers changed, but the land endured. What's fascinating, and where the guide really digs in early on, is this clash between memory, how people remembered their connection to the land, and bureaucracy, especially in the late Ottoman era.
Bureaucracy, like X's and porters.
Exactly. And specifically, how paper, official documents, started to override generations of custom. This often decided, quite starkly, who remains and who must pack.
That sounds pivotal. You're talking about the Ottoman Land Code of 1858.
Yes, the Tanzimat reforms. And this is a detail that's often missed, but it's fundamental. Before 1858, land ownership was largely based on custom, on memory. Your boundary might be, from the smooth stone to the crooked almond tree.
Very poetic, but maybe not very precise for a tax collector.
Exactly. The 1858 code demanded registration of title, the tapu. Suddenly, stamped paper, a legal document, mattered more than centuries of lived experience and oral tradition.
So you couldn't produce that piece of paper.
Then legally, it wasn't necessarily yours anymore, even if your family had worked it for generations. The guide uses this great little micro-story. The bailiff shows up, opens his ledger, and just asks the farmer, in whose name is it registered? That's the killer question.
Ink wins the argument.
Ink wins. And this wasn't just about taxes, though that was part of it. Critically, it paved the way for large tracts of land, sometimes farmed by peasants for generations, to be bought and sold by wealthy elites or, later, organizations, often absentee landlords. It reshaped the entire relationship to the land.
Okay, so that administrative shift is key. What about the geography itself? Jerusalem looms so large. The source mentions how just choosing a name for the Central Hill Temple Mount or Haram al-Sharif is already taking a side.
It really is. Jerusalem gathers, as the book puts it, 3 languages, one place. The physical hill doesn't change, but naming it frames it instantly.
How so?
Well, for Jewish tradition, it's the site of the first and second temples, anchored today by the Western Wall. For Muslims, it's the noble sanctuary, site of the Prophet's night journey, with the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. For Christians, the nearby Holy Sepulchre marks the crucifixion and resurrection.
So the name signifies which history you're prioritizing.
Precisely. It validates one narrative, one claim. The source emphasizes that acknowledging all these layers, Jewish, Islamic, Christian, forces us to accept their simultaneous presence on the very same stones. It's not one or the other, it's layered.
That complexity is stark. Okay, let's jump forward now to the British Mandate period, roughly 1917 to 1949. The theme here seems to be cross wires, conflicting promises.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's defined by this tangle, this lattice of ambiguity, largely created by the British during World War I. You've got 3 major, often contradictory commitments swirling around.
Okay, break those down for us.
First, the famous 1917 Balfour Declaration, promising British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Okay.
Second, you have promises made earlier during the war to Sharif Hossein of Mecca, leader of the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. These hinted strongly at Arab independence in the region.
So promise 1 to the Jewish people, promise 2 to the Arabs.
And third, layered underneath all this, was the secret Sykes-Picot agreement between Britain and France, which had already basically carved up the Ottoman territories into future zones of British and French control or influence.
Secret agreement, promises to Arabs, Support for a Jewish national home. How did they expect that to work out?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? It was a recipe for distrust and conflict from the get-go. The source makes a really sharp point here. What goes unwritten weighs more than what is written. Meaning, the Balfour Declaration mentioned protecting the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish population, but it was silent on their political rights. The promises to Hussein were vague about exact borders. This ambiguity allowed everyone to interpret things in their own favor, setting the stage for future clashes.
And those clashes certainly came. This leads us right into the pivotal and traumatic events of 1948-1949. The source must handle this very carefully, given the intense narratives on both sides.
It does. It presents the two defining parallel narratives impartially. For Israelis, this is the War of Independence, the successful, if costly, birth of their state after facing invasion.
And for Palestinians.
For Palestinians, it's the Nakba, the catastrophe. The source confirms the historical consensus. During the war, over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs either fled or were expelled from their homes in the territory that became Israel. These are both foundational traumas, and the source insists they don't cancel each other out, they coexist.
That's crucial. Now, what about the Palestinian state that the UN Partition Plan, Resolution 181, had proposed? Why didn't that happen alongside Israel?
Right. The UN plan envisioned two states, Jewish and Arab, with Jerusalem internationalized. The guide points to a key factor: the immediate rejection of the plan by the Palestinian Arab leadership and the surrounding Arab states. Their decision was to invade the newly declared state of Israel in May 1948.
So the war itself prevented the Arab state from forming.
Essentially, yes. Instead of a Palestinian Arab state emerging in the territories allotted by the UN, the war ended with Jordan annexing the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt taking control of the Gaza Strip. The Arab state's decision to fight Israel, rather than focus on establishing the proposed Palestinian state, fundamentally shaped the political map for the next 20 years.
So 1948 set the stage, but then 1967, the Six-Day War, dramatically changed the situation again, didn't it? Especially legally.
Absolutely. The 1967 war is another major pivot. Israel's victory resulted in its occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. This introduced the long-term reality of military occupation and, soon after, the beginning of Israeli settlement construction in those territories.
And this is where the guide really dives into the modern complexities, the Gordian knots, as it calls them.
Exactly. Part 7 tackles these really difficult, often misrepresented issues using a specific structure: myth, fact, and nuance. It's about cutting through the common simplifications.
Okay, let's try one. Gaza's status after 2005. The myth, or at least the common shorthand, is often Gaza hasn't been occupied since Israel pulled out its soldiers and settlers.
Yeah.
How does the guide add nuance?
Right, the fact is Israel did withdraw its ground troops and settlements in 2005. That physical presence ended. But the nuance, legally speaking, revolves around the concept of effective external control, meaning Israel continues to control Gaza's airspace, its coastal waters, population registry, the electromagnetic spectrum, and critically controls most of the entry and exit points for people and goods. So, while there aren't Israeli boots on the ground inside Gaza day to day, this high degree of external control leads many international legal bodies and scholars to argue that the legal status of occupation, or something very close to it, persists.
So the ability to control, even externally, is the key legal point, not just the presence of soldiers.
That's the core of the legal debate, yes. It affects everything from the flow of building materials to medical supplies to people's ability to travel. It's about the capacity to exert decisive control over life in the territory.
That kind of clarity is so important. What about the competing narratives of suffering? People often use the Nakba or the Holocaust or terrorism versus displacement to sort of invalidate the other side's claims or pain.
Yeah, the competitive victimhood trap. The source is really firm on this. The tragedies are all real and they coexist. They don't cancel each other out. The Nakba, the displacement and loss of 1948, is a core part of Palestinian identity and history. The Holocaust and historical persecution deeply inform Israeli identity and security concerns. Terrorism is a reality that causes immense suffering. The impact of occupation and displacement is also a reality.
So impartiality means acknowledging all of it.
Yes, acknowledging the mosaic. It's not black and white. Security concerns are real. Demands for rights are real. National aspirations are real. Resource disputes are real. The guide forces you to hold these competing truths simultaneously.
Okay, let's shift to perhaps the highest level of rigor the guide applies: international humanitarian law, IHL, the laws of war. Especially in urban combat situations, this gets incredibly difficult. How does the source handle accountability here?
It sticks very closely to the technical legal principles, avoiding moral judgment and focusing on the rules governing the conduct of hostilities. The two big ones are distinction and proportionality.
Distinction means
Separating combatants from civilians and military objectives from civilian objects, you can only target combatants and military objectives.
and proportionality. That one seems trickier.
It is. Proportionality means that even if you're targeting a legitimate military objective, the expected harm to civilians or damage to civilian property must not be excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage you anticipate gaining from the attack.
Excessive relative to the military advantage.
Mm-hmm.
That requires a judgment call in the moment, surely.
Absolutely. It's one of the hardest parts of IHL to apply and assess, especially after the fact. But it's a fundamental rule, and the guide highlights a crucial legal point that often gets lost in the rhetoric.
Which is?
That two illegalities do not cancel, they compound. This is so important. For instance, the act of using civilians as human shields is illegal, a war crime. But crucially, that illegality by one side does not remove the legal obligation on the attacking side to still adhere to proportionality when responding.
So one side breaking the law doesn't give the other side a free pass.
Exactly. Both acts can be illegal. Accountability under IHL is technical. It requires evidence proof of specific intent, consideration of alternatives, patterns of conduct. It's not about gut feelings. It's about rigorous, evidence-based assessment, which loops back perfectly to the whole purpose of this guide.
Right. So bringing this all together, what's the main takeaway for someone listening, trying to make sense of this incredibly complex conflict?
I think it's that understanding requires different speeds, different lenses. You need the big picture, the wars, the empires, the declarations, but you also need the micro level, the checkpoints, the permits, the land deeds, the lived experience. The guide's real value is moving you past the easy slogans.
Demanding evidence, understanding the terms, seeing the competing claims clearly.
Precisely. Clarity doesn't mean finding easy answers, because often there aren't any, but it does mean thinking with more precision based on verified information and an understanding of all perspectives. Arming yourself with facts, essentially.
The goal is readable rigor, like we said at the start.
Exactly. And maybe the most powerful part is how the source defines peace at the end. Not through treaties or anthems, but through the mundane. It draws this from the micro stories, the human level. It says, peace won't sound like some grand declaration.
What will it sound like?
It will sound like Monday.
Monday.
Yeah, it will sound like Monday. A city yawning, children running because they are late, a cafe lifting its shutter, and a phone that at last rings without urgency.
Wow. Just normal life. The absence of crisis as the definition of peace, that's a really powerful human note to end on.
It really is.
We strongly encourage you, if you want to delve deeper, to seek out this source for its meticulous detail and its commitment to clarity, a valuable tool for anyone trying to navigate this difficult subject.